She's not responding. Tase her! That's what the security officer said, right before 69-year-old Margaret Brown collapsed on the DMV floor, convulsing under 50,000 volts. Papers flew. A child cried. Her husband, Elijah, didn't shout, didn't curse. He walked past the frozen crowd, eyes locked on the supervisor, and said 5 words. Tell them about Raven Echo. That was all. No badge, no threats. Just 5 words, and suddenly the room stopped breathing. Because sometimes dignity doesn't raise its voice. It just reminds the world who it's speaking to. The morning had started like any other. Elijah Brown folded his newspaper in half, placed it neatly on the kitchen table, and poured 2 cups of coffee, one black, one with a splash of oat milk, for Margaret. She was already dressed. Cardigan buttoned wrong at the top, purse over her shoulder, DMV day, license renewal. She hated waiting in lines, but insisted on handling it herself. You sure you don't want me to do it online? Eli asked, sipping. Margaret smiled, eyes crinkling. I survived field hospitals in Kandahar. I can survive the Department of Motor Vehicles. He chuckled. Fair enough. By 9:40 a.m., they were seated near the back wall of the DMV lobby. The fluorescent lights buzzed. A mother hushed a toddler. An older man argued with a clerk about documentation he didn't bring. The line moved slowly. Elijah didn't mind. Patience had been his first weapon in the Army, and his last in retirement. Margaret checked her number again. B-17. They were calling B-14. Eli glanced around. The security presence was new. A young officer stood near the entrance, chest puffed under a pressed uniform. He looked barely 30, the kind that spoke in instructions, and rarely blinked. Margaret noticed him too. She frowned slightly. She'd seen that stance before, not in peacekeeping roles, but in barricades and lockdown zones. The wrong kind of energy for a Tuesday morning. At 9:53, her number was called. B-17, window 3. Margaret stood up, clutching the brown envelope they'd filled the night before. She walked deliberately, a slight limp showing from her 3rd hip procedure. Elijah watched her go, then folded his arms and leaned back in his chair. He trusted her, always had, but something in the room shifted, a subtle tightening of the air. It began with the line on the floor, yellow, faded, meant to indicate where to wait. Margaret stepped past it, without realizing, distracted, focused on the envelope, trying to hear clearly over the low hum of a malfunctioning speaker. Ma'am, I need you to step back. She didn't react. The officer raised his voice. Ma'am, behind the line. Margaret turned halfway, eyebrows raised in confusion. She wasn't being defiant. She simply hadn't heard. Someone behind the counter muttered, They never listen. The young guard's jaw tightened. His hand moved toward his belt. Elijah sat up straighter. His fingers gripped the edge of the plastic chair. It was too quiet for what was about to happen. The kind of quiet Eli had heard right before a checkpoint went hot, right before someone made a decision they couldn't take back. Margaret turned toward the voice, blinking slowly. Her expression, a mix of confusion and effort. Her hearing aids worked fine most days, but loud rooms and overlapping voices still made things harder. She adjusted the strap of her purse, trying to make sense of what the officer had said. Behind the counter, a clerk sighed audibly. She's ignoring protocol. The guard took 2 steps forward, his hand now fully gripping the taser. Ma'am, last warning. Elijah stood. He didn't raise his voice, didn't call out. He rose from his chair the way he had countless times before, with measured calm and a spine that still remembered formation. But it was too late. The guard drew and fired. The click-crack of electricity sliced through the room. The yellow prongs hit Margaret square in the chest. For a split second, her body arched, a violent puppet yanked by invisible strings. Then, she collapsed. The envelope flew from her hands. A photo of her and Elijah, from their granddaughter's graduation, slid across the tile face up. Her purse spilled, pills, receipts. A half-eaten granola bar scattered. Her head hit the floor with a dull, sickening sound. Gasps rippled across the waiting room. A child began crying. The clerk behind the desk froze mid-keystroke. An elderly man gripped his walker tighter, staring, as if his mind couldn't quite process what had just happened. The young guard stood over her, taser still extended. He exhaled, as if releasing pressure. But there was no relief in the room. Elijah didn't rush forward. He didn't shout. He walked, past the rows of seats, past the stunned faces, past the manager who had begun reaching for the emergency phone. His boots echoed softly against the tile. He stopped beside Margaret's body and looked down, his eyes unreadable. She was breathing, shallow. Her eyelids fluttered. Then he looked at the supervisor, a middle-aged man with a clipboard in one hand and panic rising behind his glasses, and with a voice that was calm, low, and utterly unshaken. Elijah said, "Tell them about Raven Echo." The room held its breath. The supervisor blinked. "Excuse me?" Elijah didn't repeat himself. He reached into the breast pocket of his flannel shirt and pulled out a faded leather ID holder. Inside, a badge, not police, not military, something else. The kind of emblem not seen in public offices. Dark metal, engraved with an eagle, a triangle, and a number no one spoke aloud. A clerk behind the desk whispered into her headset. She stared at her monitor, like it had started showing ghosts. The supervisor looked at the badge, then at Elijah, then at the woman on the floor. Everything slowed. Even the buzzing lights seemed quieter. The supervisor didn't speak at first. He simply stared at the badge Elijah held out, its worn edges, the emblem pressed deep into metal, and the identifier below it, Tier 1 clearance, Raven Echo Protocol. Then he took a slow step back. "You?" "I need a moment," the supervisor muttered, and turned toward the side office, fumbling with a key card as he rushed inside. Behind the main counter, a clerk was already typing furiously. Headset live. "We've got a confirmation request," she whispered. "Raven Echo, repeat, Raven Echo clearance presented by a civilian. Name, Elijah Brown. Yes, I'll hold." The young guard, the one who had pulled the trigger, remained frozen, his arm still halfway extended, taser slack in his grip, like his body hadn't caught up with what he had just done. Elijah knelt beside Margaret. He didn't say her name, didn't call for help. He simply pressed 2 fingers to her neck and waited. Pulse. Light, but steady. Her breathing. Shallow, but regular. "You're all right," he whispered. "You're all right." He gently brushed a paper from her face, her appointment ticket, B17. Across the room, someone had begun recording. A woman with a smartphone angled her camera silently, trembling, as she captured the image. An old man beside his wife, a crowd too shocked to move, and a government office, suspended in the gravity of something it didn't understand. Then, the side door opened. The supervisor reappeared, but he wasn't alone. A man in plain clothes followed him. Charcoal jacket, earpiece. The kind of presence that didn't wait in DMV lines. He didn't ask for Elijah's ID. He looked at the badge, then at Elijah. They locked eyes. "Elijah Brown," the man said. Elijah nodded. The man exhaled, not with annoyance, but with recognition. "You trained my brother," he said. "Langley, 99. He still talks about the 4 words you drilled into them." Elijah tilted his head slightly. "Rules are temporary. Discipline lasts." The man nodded once, then turned to the guard. "Remove your gear." The guard's mouth opened slightly, but no sound came. He looked at the taser in his hand, then at Elijah, then at the woman on the floor. Slowly, he unclipped the device and set it on the counter. "Badge 2, the man added. The room remained silent, but the energy had shifted. People weren't just watching anymore. They were witnessing something about the way Elijah moved, without fury, without arrogance, made it clear. He wasn't demanding power. He already had it, the kind earned in shadows, remembered in silence, and revealed only when the world needed reminding. The man in the charcoal jacket wasn't wearing a badge, but everyone in the room could feel the rank in his voice. He moved with calm precision, the way people do when they've spent years navigating crisis under pressure. He gave no orders to the crowd. He didn't have to. His presence ordered the room without words. "Elijah Brown," he said again, reading from the ID holder Elijah still held. "Tier 1, Raven Echo. Final authority signature, Langston, Joint Ops Command." He paused. "Sir, you shouldn't be here without escort." Elijah nodded. "I didn't come as Tier 1. I came as her husband." The man looked down at Margaret, still lying on the floor, her breathing steadier now. EMTs were on their way. Someone had finally called. The plainclothes officer turned to the young guard, who now stood awkwardly off to the side without gear, without a badge. "You tased the wife of the man who wrote the engagement protocol for domestic security during civilian crisis," he said flatly. "The manual you were supposed to study. You just violated line 7, paragraph 3, word for word." A murmur rippled through the clerks at the back. One of the older workers whispered, "That's the Brown clause, isn't it? About verbal warning minimums and threat posture?" "Yes," the man replied. "That's him. That's Brown." The young guard's lips parted slightly. His eyes went from confusion to horror. Across the waiting room, people began to rise from their seats. Not out of panic, but out of respect. An older woman clutched her walker and slowly stood. A father lifted his child gently into his arms. The teenager who had been recording lowered her phone, placed a hand to her heart. Elijah didn't seem to notice. He stayed kneeling beside Margaret, one hand resting lightly on her shoulder, his eyes soft. "I wrote the words," he said quietly. "Not for show. But she's the reason I believed in them." The man in the charcoal suit stepped back, giving the couple space. The supervisor returned from the office, pale, holding a printed document in trembling hands. "Mr. Brown," he said, voice cracking, We had no idea. We deeply regret." Elijah raised one hand, not to silence him, but to stop the ritual of apology before it began. "Then don't regret it," he said. "Learn from it." His tone wasn't harsh. It was steady, final. Behind him, someone opened the doors for the paramedics. As they rushed in with a stretcher, Elijah gently lifted Margaret's hand into his, whispered her name. She stirred. Her eyes fluttered open, saw only him. "You're safe," he said, and for the first time, since the taser fired, she smiled, faint, tired, but unmistakably real. 3 days later, the DMV closed for internal restructuring. The sign on the glass door didn't explain much. It didn't have to. By then, the video had already circulated, not just in the local news, but on every platform that traded in quiet outrage and silent heroes. No title, no hashtags, just 5 words, burned into the subtitles as Elijah knelt beside his wife. "Tell them about Raven Echo." The footage ended right there. The rest wasn't recorded, but people talked. Talked about the way the staff stood when Margaret was wheeled out on the stretcher, about how the man in the charcoal suit placed a hand on Elijah's shoulder, not as comfort, but as acknowledgement. Talked about how, the next morning, 2 unmarked SUVs pulled into Elijah's driveway. They left behind a sealed envelope, a military coin, and a restored photograph. Elijah and a classified unit, faces blurred, except his. He never opened the envelope. He didn't need to. The following week, Margaret returned to the DMV. Her steps were slow, but firm. Her arm was wrapped, her chest still tender from the barbs. But her eyes were sharp again. She didn't go alone. Elijah walked beside her, as he always had. They didn't speak much. They didn't need to. At the entrance, the new security officer, older, more seasoned, opened the door for them. He nodded, not as a courtesy, but as a form of address. Inside, the fluorescent lights had been replaced. The line was orderly. The tension was gone. But something else had changed. Above the check-in station, framed in dark wood and gold trim, was a new plaque. No logo, no names, Just a single quote, engraved in matte black metal. True power doesn't shout, it remembers. E.B. Beneath it, a folded American flag, and a small brass plate that read, "In honor of those who served, and those who still serve, without rank." Margaret looked at it for a long time, not with pride, but with something deeper, recognition. Then, she stepped forward to the window. The clerk on duty didn't ask for ID. She just said gently, "We're glad you came back." Margaret smiled. "So are we." As they walked out, a few people in line nodded. One woman pressed a hand to her chest. Nobody took photos. Nobody applauded. But the silence that followed them out the door said everything that words couldn't. Elijah never spoke to the press. They came, of course, parked across the street in vans, waited near the VFW hall, called at odd hours, asking for a comment. He never answered, and Margaret never asked him to. "We're not a story," he told her once. "We're just a reminder." She didn't argue. Life returned to its rhythm, though something subtle had shifted. At the grocery store, employees now helped her reach the top shelf. At the diner, a new menu item appeared, the E&M special. 2 coffees side by side. No charge on Tuesdays. Elijah resumed his work on engines. Tuesdays with the teens at the auto shop. Thursdays, driving other vets to appointments. Saturdays under a truck, with hands that still remembered torque and timing, better than most men half his age. But now, every once in a while, a black SUV would stop quietly in front of their house. No sirens, no lights, just a delivery, a book about encrypted communications, a replacement part for an obsolete radio. Once, a box containing a folded flag and a note with just 2 words, "Still watching." Eli never replied. One afternoon, a new security trainee came by the garage. His cruiser had overheated 3 blocks away. Embarrassed, young, red in the face. He stammered through an apology as Elijah wiped his hands on an old cloth and popped the hood. They worked in silence for 20 minutes. The engine coughed, then purred. The trainee stood awkwardly. "Sir," he started. Elijah looked at him, eyebrows raised just slightly. "I just wanted to say, they talk about you at the academy now, about what happened. They say you could have sued, ended careers, forced retirements, but you didn't." Elijah didn't respond right away. He tightened one last bolt, closed the hood. Then, without turning, he said, "Because revenge doesn't fix people, and I don't build weapons anymore." The trainee nodded, slowly, then extended his hand. "Thank you for everything." Elijah shook it once, firm, then went back to his workbench. That evening, Margaret sat beside him on the porch, her hand resting lightly over his. The sun dipped below the trees, painting everything in amber and quiet. "You still think they'll forget again?" she asked. Elijah smiled faintly. "They always do," he said. "But someone remembers." And with that, they sat in silence, not waiting, not hoping, just being. Because true dignity doesn't live in the headlines. It lives in the man who fixes things, even when no one's watching. If stories like this mean something to you, consider subscribing, not for applause, but to remind the world that quiet honor still matters. Thank you for being here. See you in the next story.